Hey, if you listen to this podcast, I think you will also love my newsletter, Elevator Gazette. I talk a lot about elevating your professional and your personal lives. Make sure to subscribe to my newsletter. Go to anushakanan.com/email list, and I'm sure you will love it. Join everyone who is like-minded. And now let's get into the episode. Hey, before we dive into this week's episode, if you've been enjoying the show, I'd love your support. Take just 10 seconds to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps others discover the wisdom and inspiration that I share on the Pivot to Balance podcast. Let's build a community of balance seekers together. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to share the love. Now let's dive into the episode. Hello and welcome to the Pivot to Balance podcast. I'm your host, AK, and I hope you're doing well. In a world that pulls us in a million different directions and with a billion distractions, finding balance can feel like an ambiguous quest. Join me on this podcast as I try to navigate life's twists and turns with mindfulness, purpose, and grace. In each episode, we will dive into topics like self-care, personal growth, mindset shifts by sharing practical insights, stories, and maybe even interviews. Get ready to pivot, to recalibrate, and find your balance. Follow the Pivot to Balance podcast, and I will see you on the other side. Welcome back to this week's episode. I want to start off with an announcement. Can you believe it? We've officially hit the 1-year mark. That's right. I think last week, September 15th, is the 1-year anniversary of the Pivot to Balance podcast. And it's been quite the journey. I know that I dropped off a lot in between, but I am back on track. And I just want to say over the past year, I've had the privilege of sharing countless conversations, stories, and insights with you all. And we've tackled everything from career growth to mindfulness to fitness. And today we're diving into something deeply personal that I've faced numerous times along the way, because we're actually nearing December. I know it's something like this year just went by super fast, but I've been reflecting a lot. And I was thinking about something that I've been experiencing for the past 4 years. And I'm sure you've experienced it too. If you've seen the title, you know what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome. If COVID gave us anything, it gave us a lot, bad things and good things. But imposter syndrome is the word that a lot of us started learning. Now, if you've been following along with my journey, and if you haven't, you should know all of this. I would love for you to know all of this. You know, I've started way too many things these past few years. I first launched the Marketing Woman podcast. If I go a little bit before that, there's just way too many things. So I'll stick to like the past 4 years. I launched the Marketing Woman podcast. I co-hosted 20s in Transition for a bit. I moved from India to Boston to Cleveland to start a new job, left that job, moved back to Boston, launched Elevator Gazette, my newsletter, started making TikToks, followed me at Anushakanan, launched a YouTube channel, and even created a LinkedIn page for the Marketing Woman podcast, and of course, started the Pivot to Balance. Just listing all of that makes me realize how much I've put on my plate. And sure, it sounds impressive when I rattle it off, but every time I begin something new, that little voice creeps in, that one that whispers, who are you to do this? Who is even going to care about this? And that's exactly what I want to talk about today, imposter syndrome. I love starting new things, bringing ideas to life, and pushing myself creatively. But like many of you, I often feel like an imposter. I ask myself, what makes me qualified? Or what if I fail? What if people just know that I just failed miserably at it? Imposter syndrome is something that shows up for all of us at some point. It's like an inevitable. And over this past year of podcasting, actually past 2 years of podcasting, I've realized that feeling like an imposter doesn't go away just because you've been doing something for a while or had some success. It's a constant companion for most of us. But here's the thing, it doesn't have to stop you. So let's break it down, some lessons I've learned about kind of how to navigate imposter syndrome, not just from my own experience, but from the stories and insights of people I've had the privilege to talk to this year and learn from. So first up, the more you do, the more you grow. Imposter syndrome thrives on the idea that you're not good enough. But the truth is, we often underestimate the value of our experience. Each new thing I started, whether it was a podcast, newsletter or even those TikTok videos, they pushed me out of my comfort zone. So it's not about getting it right the first time or the second time. It's about the growth that comes from the process. Every small win adds up to something bigger. And growth is a reminder that you're evolving, whether you feel like an imposter or not. Next up, as we're celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the Pivot to Balance podcast, it's a perfect reminder that milestones like this are about the journey, not the end result. So celebrate the journey, not the destination. This past year, if you've been following along, it wasn't exactly like a smooth sailing process. There were episodes that didn't perform well, times when I questioned if anyone was really listening. In those moments of doubt, I learned to appreciate the act of showing up, because you've got to celebrate the fact that you're doing the work even when it feels like no one's watching. Because trust me, people are watching. And I talked about this on my recent TikTok video as well. They care more than you realize. But even if they don't, let's for a second say they don't, I definitely think it gives you something that I just can't put it to words. Like, it gives you some sort of a value add to your life when you just focus on doing the work, when you just passionately do something. Number 3 is let your passion guide you, not perfection. I think imposter syndrome is rooted in this idea that we have to be perfect to start or to continue something. But if there's one thing I've learned this past year, it's that perfection isn't the goal. Progress is. Whether it's starting a podcast, a YouTube channel, or a new job, it's your passion that will keep you going, not your need to get everything right. And the funny thing is, your passion is contagious. When you're excited about what you're doing, people feel that energy and it draws them in. So even if you're doubting yourself, let your passion guide you forward, because that's honestly what I am doing. The 4th one is to create a positive impact, even in small ways. One of the biggest shifts I've made is realizing that impact doesn't always mean changing the world overnight, but sometimes the most meaningful impact is in the small things. So whether that's a single podcast episode that resonates with someone or a TikTok that inspires one person, when I think back on the past year of the Pivot to Balance, the messages and feedback from listeners have been some of the most rewarding moments. That's how I know it's worth it. Despite having any feelings of doubt, even though I took so much, breaks in between, there were a lot of people who reached out and be like, hey, we're waiting for you to drop the next episode. So even if you feel like an imposter, remember that what you're doing matters, even in ways you might not see right away. I want to take a second to thank everybody that has been so supportive of literally every single thing I start. I honestly wouldn't be doing any of this without your support. So I just want to say thank you so much. It really means the world to me. And the last one I want to talk about is currently what I'm doing, which is the courage to keep going. At the end of the day, navigating imposter syndrome comes down to courage. Courage to keep showing up, to keep putting yourself out there, and to keep believing in your worth, even when it feels shaky. That's what this past year of doing so many things has taught me. Every time I felt like giving into the voice that says, you're not enough, people don't really care, I chose to move forward anyway. And that choice is what creates momentum, and that's what builds confidence. So once again, as we celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the Pivot to Balance podcast, I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in, for sharing this journey with me, and for reminding me why I started this in the first place. I'm also really excited that I had the first guest on the Pivot to Balance podcast last week. If you haven't heard that episode, please go and check it out. It was a really good conversation. I've always wanted to have a guest on the Pivot to Balance, and I just couldn't find that one person that I felt like would be the right guest that resonated well with me. And I'm also super grateful to Anushka because that was such an amazing episode. If you have any recommendations on who you want me to have on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. I actually started a public one. I'm always starting public accounts and then closing it because Instagram is just not my vibe for some reason. But I'm going to give it a try one more time. So let's see, maybe this time's a charm, and I don't even know what this time is. So my Instagram is in the description or in the show notes. Please go ahead and follow me. I hope today's episode gives you kind of a reminder that even though imposter syndrome might always be there, it doesn't have to hold you back. So I'm also going to leave you with a challenge. The next time you feel like an imposter, ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen if I just keep going? Spoiler alert, the worst thing is staying stuck. The best thing, you grow, you learn, and you make an impact along the way. So go grab a cup